The plantation stood like a wound against the Louisiana marsh, its white columns gleaming even beneath a sky swollen with storm. Locals called it Belle Mire, though there was no beauty in its soil, only blood, old and restless. Travelers passing down the muddy road swore they could feel the air thicken as they neared its gates, heavy with a silence that watched. Inside, the master ruled like a priest of his own dark gospel. Silas Wren, a man born into inheritance and rot, believed himself chosen, not by God, but by something older, crueler. His family's wealth had been built on the backs of the enslaved, but in Silas's hands the land had become something worse. Rumors whispered through the quarters that he had made a pact under a blood moon, that each harvest demanded a life. His wife, Margaret, had once been the portrait of Southern grace, delicate, God-fearing, and proud. But years beside, Silas had hollowed her from the inside. The woman who used to sing hymns at dawn now wandered the halls barefoot, muttering verses from her Bible like spells against unseen eyes. The slaves said she'd seen what her husband did in the cellar. The rituals, the candles, the carved symbols etched into the floorboards. Some claimed she'd tried to run once, and Silas had brought her back by her hair. And then there was Elias, the husband of one of Silas's field hands, a man whose silence was as heavy as his chains. His wife, Naomi, was the master's obsession. Silas had claimed her body in secret and in public, mocking the husband who could do nothing to stop him. Each night, Elias was forced to kneel as Silas paraded her through the great hall, draped in white lace like an unwilling bride. The humiliation was a ritual of its own. A desecration repeated until Naomi's voice broke and Elias's eyes turned to stone. The house was alive with whispers. Servants spoke of strange sounds rising from the parlor after midnight, low chanting, the bleat of an animal, the scrape of chains. Children claimed to see figures standing in doorways, pale and watching. The older slaves warned them to look away, to never answer if their names were called in the dark. But Naomi could no longer look away. The bruises on her wrists, the torn fabric of her dress, the way Silas's breath reeked of something sulphurous, it all told her the devil had taken up residence in the man she was forced to serve. Still, she prayed. Every night, she whispered to a God she feared had forgotten her, clutching her tattered Bible until her knuckles bled. One night, the sky cracked open with thunder, and the air itself seemed to tremble. Silas had gathered his guests in the great room, other masters, all drunk on rum and arrogance. They watched as Naomi was made to stand at the center, her eyes wide but unbroken. Silas called it a celebration, a baptism of power. When Elias was dragged in, his face beaten and swollen, even the guests turned pale. He was forced to kneel before them, before his wife. Silas smiled, a serpent's smile, and lifted a chalice. Tonight, he said, we drink in the name of dominion. Let no man forget his place beneath me. The storm howled, candles flickered, and in that moment Naomi's gaze met Elias's across the room. A silent vow exchanged between two souls who had nothing left to lose. Something ancient stirred in the air, as if heaven itself was holding its breath. Outside, lightning split the sky, striking the old oak where the hangings had once been done. The ground shuddered. The wind carried whispers that did not belong to the living. The night of reckoning had begun. The storm did not pass. It lingered above the plantation like a curse refusing to die. Rain battered the fields, turning the earth into mud thick as blood, and lightning illuminated the house in flashes that made it look like a ruin from another world. Inside, the great room stank of wine, sweat, and something dark or fear. The guests had fled to their carriages once the storm grew violent, leaving only the family and the slaves behind. Silas Wren staggered through the hall, his laughter echoing against the walls. He called for Naomi. She did not answer. He found her kneeling at the chapel door, her torn dress clinging to her skin, her Bible open on the floorboards. Her lips moved soundlessly, her eyes red, rimmed but calm. Silas sneered. "You pray for mercy," he said, "but mercy does not live here." He seized her by the hair and dragged her to her feet. The candlelight flickered across his face, revealing something feral in his grin. "You belong to me, to my blood, to my name." She didn't resist. She only whispered, "Not anymore." Before he could strike her, the door behind him creaked open. Elias stood there, soaked, silent, eyes burning with something that made even Silas pause. He had freed himself from his chains. In his hand he held a rusted blade stolen from the barn, slick with rain. "Step away from her," Elias said quietly. Silas laughed, that cruel, high laugh that had filled the house for years. "You think you can command me. You're nothing. You're filth." But the storm drowned out his words. A deafening crack of thunder rattled the windows, and in that moment, something inside Elias snapped. He lunged, the blade met flesh, and Silas roared, more in disbelief than pain. The two men crashed into the altar, candles scattering, wax spilling like melted bone. Naomi screamed. Blood splattered across the old hymn books. Silas fought wildly, clawing at Elias's face, cursing in words that didn't sound human. "You'll burn," he hissed, "you'll all burn." Elias's voice was low, steady. "Then let me light the fire." He struck again. When it was done, Silas lay gasping, clutching his side, eyes wide and glassy. He spat blood and laughter. "You can kill me," he rasped, "but you'll never kill what I serve." Naomi stepped forward, trembling, her Bible still clutched to her chest. "Then may God do it for us," she whispered. Lightning struck again, this time so close it rattled the house, the air filled with the scent of ozone and smoke. Silas's body convulsed once, then went still. For a moment there was silence, only the rain, the crackle of candles, and the sound of Elias's ragged breathing. Naomi knelt beside her husband. "It's over," she said, though her voice shook. "It's over now." But Elias only stared at the body. "No," he murmured, "not yet. He made this house a temple for his demons. It still breathes his name. We have to burn it, all of it." Naomi looked around, the symbols carved into the wood, the chains bolted to the walls, the altar drenched in blood. She nodded slowly. Together they began their grim work. Elias tore the drapes from the windows, stacking them in the center of the room. Naomi gathered candles, tipping them until wax pooled on the floorboards. She whispered verses from Psalms, her voice shaking but clear. Each word felt like a weapon. When Elias struck the first flame, it caught fast. The fire spread greedily, crawling up the walls, devouring curtains, portraits, and the years of evil soaked into every beam. The heat grew fierce. Naomi took one last look at the corpse of Silas Wren. His eyes stared at the ceiling, reflecting the firelight like two coins of hell. She turned away, clutching her Bible close. "Come," Elias said softly, "before the roof falls." They stepped into the hall, the blaze roaring behind them, and for the first time in years, Naomi felt the air lift from her chest. The storm outside had quieted. The thunder faded, and as they crossed the threshold, the flames behind them burned brighter, as though purging the house from within. The devil's family had met its end, but the night was far from done. The fire spread faster than they expected. By the time Elias and Naomi reached the front steps, the windows had begun to burst from the heat, glass raining down like shards of ice. The air outside was heavy with the smell of smoke and something older, like burnt iron and salt. The house seemed alive, groaning and crackling, as if the spirits that had dwelled there were clawing to escape the flames. Elias turned once to look back. Through the shifting glow, he saw the portrait of Silas's ancestors still hanging above the hearth, those pale, cold faces watching their legacy dissolve into ash. "Let them burn with him," Elias murmured. Naomi's voice trembled as she replied, "They already are." They descended the steps together. Each plank creaked underfoot, glowing with embers. In the yard below, the enslaved gathered in silence. Faces rose from the dark, men, women, children, drawn by the sound of destruction. None spoke, none screamed, they only watched, the firelight reflecting in their eyes. Elias and Naomi stood before them, framed by smoke and light. For the first time, there were no overseers, no shouted orders. Only the sound of crackling timber and the deep, thunderous collapse of burning wood. An older woman, her hair silver beneath a torn scarf, whispered, "God has come." No one disagreed. The roof gave way with a roar. Sparks shot into the night sky, carried by the wind across the fields where the cane swayed in ghostly waves. The plantation, the place that had fed on blood for decades, was turning to ruin. Naomi sank to her knees. The rain began again, soft and thin, hissing as it met the flames. She lifted her Bible, its cover scorched from the heat, and began to pray not for Selah's, not for the family that had tormented them, but for the soil beneath their feet, poisoned by years of cruelty. "Let it rest," she whispered. "Let this ground sleep." Elias laid a hand on her shoulder. "We can't stay." She nodded. They turned toward the forest at the edge of the property. Each step through the tall grass felt like crossing from one world into another. Behind them, the inferno roared, a living thing consuming everything it had ever touched. When they reached the tree line, Elias stopped again. He looked back once more, not at the house, but at the people. Dozens stood there, their faces lit by firelight. He wanted to tell them something, anything that might make sense of what had happened, but words failed. His throat was thick with smoke and grief. It was Naomi who spoke. Her voice, though weak, carried over the crackling. "Do not fear the morning," she said. "What was taken will be returned. What was bound will be free." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads bowed. Some wept quietly, others simply stared at the flames as if watching the face of judgment itself. Elias took Naomi's hand and led her into the woods. Branches snapped underfoot. The forest seemed to swallow them whole. The deeper they went, the cooler the air became, the rain thicker, the light dimmer, yet neither stopped. Behind them, the plantation collapsed inward, the final beam falling with a hiss and a sigh. The sound echoed like the closing of a tomb. For a long while, the people remained in the yard, watching the last embers flicker. No one tried to put out the fire. No one dared to approach the ruins. When dawn came, the house was gone. Only the black skeleton of its frame remained, the earth around it steaming like a wound that would never heal. That morning, rumors began to spread. Some said they saw figures walking from the fire, two shadows hand in hand, vanishing into the trees. Others swore they heard whispers in the smoke. Prayers turned into wind. By evening, the overseers had returned to find nothing but ashes. The fields were quiet. The people refused to speak of what had happened. When questioned, they only said the same words softly over and over. "The devil's family is gone." But among them, something had changed. The silence that once meant fear now meant protection. The legend had begun. Morning came gray and hollow. Smoke drifted through the cane fields like fog from the underworld, clinging to every stalk and stone. The mansion was gone, reduced to a skeletal frame of blackened beams and molten glass. Where once there had been marble steps and polished railings, there now lay only ash. The overseers arrived just after dawn. They found no bodies, only fragments of bone too small to name. They searched the ruins for Selah's Wren, for his wife and daughters, for the servants who had vanished into the storm, but found nothing. Some said the fire had burned too hot, hotter than wood alone could account for. Others whispered that the earth itself had swallowed what it could not sanctify. By noon, word spread through St. Landry Parish, the Wrens are gone. The local magistrate sent a man to take testimony. None of the field hands spoke. They stood before him, eyes down, answering only with silence or verses. "The Lord has delivered." One woman finally murmured, It was all she said, and all the others repeated. Within a week, the plantation was declared abandoned. The fields withered without tending. The cane turned gray, brittle, hollow. Travelers passing along the river road began to say the ground smelled of sulfur after rain. Horses refused to go near. Dogs howled through the night, and then came the stories. Children spoke of lights flickering between the trees, pale figures moving through the ruins, their voices faint as a hymn. Some claimed to hear weeping from beneath the earth, others the rhythmic thud of something beating against the floorboards that were no longer there. In 1835, a priest from Oplauses rode to bless the land. His diary was later found among church archives. The ink had run in places from moisture, but one entry remained legible. No birds sing here, the air tastes of blood and rain. The ground smokes, though there is no fire. I blessed it thrice, yet the wind carried the words away. He left that same night and never returned. Decades passed. The Wren's name was struck from records, their estate parceled off to others who tried to farm it but never stayed long. Houses built on the old foundation burned. Tools broke for no reason, livestock refused to breed. One man swore his wife woke in the night speaking in another voice, whispering prayers in a language she did not know. By 1881, the property was referred to only as the Hollow, its boundaries marked by overgrown cypress and vines. Locals avoided it except to point it out to travelers with the same half-fearful reverence one might use for a graveyard. But every few years, when the air turned heavy and the moon hid behind clouds, someone claimed to see a man and woman walking the edge of the forest, hand in hand, barefoot, their faces pale as smoke. The man carried a blade, the woman a Bible, neither spoke. They said the fire still burned behind them, though no flame was seen. Old people whispered that it was Elias and Naomi, wandering the border between worlds, making sure the Wren's covenant stayed buried. Others believed they were only memories, bound to the land until it healed, but there were darker tales too, tales that claimed the Wren's bloodline survived elsewhere, that their descendants still performed secret rites to reclaim what was lost. No proof was ever found, only whispers, only warnings, and on summer nights when the air grew thick with rain, the smell of smoke returned, faint but undeniable. Those who lived near the hollow said it came from beneath the soil, as though something beneath still remembered burning. Some said it was justice, others said it was the beginning of something that never truly ended. Either way, the devil's family had left its mark, and the land refused to forget. Records concerning the Wrens were believed lost until 1893, when a set of charred journals was discovered behind the false wall of a courthouse storage room in Oplauses. The ledgers, half burnt and water damaged, bore the name Dr. Alaric Wren, a distant cousin of Sela's, who had practiced medicine in New Orleans during the 1830s. Their contents were disturbing, neither purely scientific nor religious, but something in between. The pages were written in a neat but trembling hand. Some were signed, others ended abruptly mid-sentence. The handwriting shifted near the end, as though written by someone feverish or terrified. Our blood carries the mark of what Sela's summoned. The body does not forget the covenant. The children are born with the eyes of the dead. The journals referenced experiments in vital inheritance, a study of whether sin could be passed through the body like disease. Alaric described treating relatives afflicted by what he called somnolent fevers of conscience. Victims would fall into fugue states, murmuring names that did not belong to them. When roused, they often described fire, rain, and the sound of chains. The surviving entries grew more erratic. They see her, the woman from the fields, the one he defiled. Her voice comes through the cracks in the walls. She prays in the same tone again and again. They answer her in sleep. I have examined the skulls of 2 children born under our name. The bone is malformed, an indentation near the occipital crest, like a brand. I cannot explain it by medicine. Perhaps it is the shape of punishment. The last page was scorched, but a portion of the writing could still be read. If fire cleansed them once, it did not cleanse us. The curse travels with the blood. The earth may sleep, but the body remembers. When the journals were submitted to the State Medical Board for review, most officials dismissed them as the ramblings of a delusional man, yet several noted the uncanny detail in his descriptions, especially the symptoms recorded decades before similar cases of dissociative hysteria were known. The documents were quietly archived under Anomalous Medical File 24A, but word leaked. Within months, scholars and spiritualists from as far as Boston arrived in Louisiana, hoping to find the ruins of the Wren estate. They found the ground still scorched. The cane fields around it refused to grow. When one man attempted to dig for remnants of the old foundation, he reported a hollow beneath the soil, as if the earth itself had caved inward. Days later, he fell ill with fever and delirium. His notes ended with the same words found in the journal, "She is praying again." By 1901, the area had been officially condemned. Locals claimed livestock died if tethered too close to the boundary. Children who played near the hollow came home shaking, unable to speak. A priest from Baton Rouge, called to reconsecrate the site, refused to finish his rite after claiming to hear a woman's voice reciting scripture backward. His report was later sealed by the diocese. The old ledgers of the Wrens were eventually transferred to a private collection at Tulane University, where they remain under restricted access. Historians who have reviewed them note that several pages appear to be written on parchment rather than paper, and that the ink, under certain light, seems faintly red. No one has been able to prove whether the writings were genuine or forgery. But those who have touched the journals report the same unsettling scent, smoke and rain. In 1912, the Wren estate resurfaced in public record through the work of Professor Edwin Lafton, an anthropologist from Chicago known for his studies in hereditary superstition. He arrived in St. Landry Parish under the guise of mapping Southern necro folklore, a phrase which, in retrospect, concealed more than it revealed. Lafton had learned of the Alaric Wren journals while assisting with the cataloging of restricted archives at Tulane. He described them as the only surviving documentation of bloodline contamination manifesting in cultural hysteria. His field notes, now preserved in microfilm, begin clinically but soon read like a confession. March 17, 1912, the land smells of damp rust. Locals refuse to walk the perimeter. They say the hollow breathes. A farmer told me his dog returned from there with its eyes clouded and its mouth full of black soil. March 19, a woman named Eulalie claims descent from the Wrens. Her hands tremble when she speaks. The right eye wanders, and she hums before answering questions, as if echoing someone else's rhythm. Lafton conducted interviews, drew genealogical trees, and collected samples, strands of hair, bits of soil, and in one disturbing instance, a small glass vial containing what he described as resinous tissue. He never explained its source. By late April, he had begun describing his work as experimental ethnology. He believed trauma could be mapped like inheritance, that guilt could enter the body as surely as blood. He claimed the Wren's affliction was the material consequence of moral collapse. One entry from his correspondence with the Louisiana Medical Review Board reads, "What we call haunting may in truth be a kind of cellular recollection, the moral memory of the body. The Wrens simply remember too much." That same month, locals reported strange phenomena near the hollow. Smoke rising without fire, the sound of water boiling under the ground. Lafton dismissed these as environmental hysteria. Yet his writing betrays unease. May 3, I have heard her. I thought it was the wind, but it was words. I cannot record them. When I tried, the phonograph needle split. 3 days later, his assistant, a graduate student named Callahan, vanished. The only item found in the man's tent was a sheet of paper bearing a single sentence in thick pencil: "She is awake." By May 9, Lafton's entries grew incoherent. He began referring to the voice beneath, claiming it answered in Latin reversed when he recited Psalm 51. He insisted that the soil breathes carbon not from the dead, but from something still living. When a search party reached his camp on May 14, they found the tents abandoned, instruments scattered, and a trail of footprints leading toward the collapsed foundation of the old Wren house. Lafton himself was recovered a day later, wandering barefoot along the Bayou Teche, covered in mud, unable to speak. He was later confined to the Charenton Asylum, where he lived in near silence for 12 years. The only words he ever wrote again were carved into the wooden edge of his bed frame: "Inheritance is a door." After his death in 1924, his personal effects were sealed by the university, among them a cracked phonograph cylinder labeled Field Recording #7 The Hollow. No one has been able to play it since. The wax disintegrates upon contact. Those who have seen the cylinder in storage say that when light hits its grooves, faint letters seem to form the same inscription found in the ashes of the Wren house nearly a century earlier: "Et sanguis non dormiet, the blood shall not sleep." The Wrens returned to the world of science in 1937, when Dr. Miriam H. Caldwell, a psychiatrist at Tulane University, began her study on the persistence of familial hallucinations in rural populations. Her subjects were not named in print, but hospital records confirm that family W. of St. Landry Parish fit every descriptor. Caldwell was a meticulous woman, trained in Europe, skeptical of religion, and convinced that madness could be graphed like weather. Her initial correspondence with the Louisiana Department of Health reveals curiosity, not fear. If hysteria is inherited through suggestion, then the Wren family is a perfect control group. 3 generations removed from the original delusion, yet still it flowers. Between 1937 and 1941, Caldwell conducted 22 interviews across 6 surviving descendants. Their symptoms shared uncanny overlap: recurrent nightmares of fire, hymns sung backward, and the sense of something breathing under the house. One young man described seeing a woman kneeling in the field, but facing the wrong way. Caldwell classified these experiences as inherited trauma manifesting through mythic association, but her notes reveal uncertainty creeping in. March 12, 1938, the youngest girl speaks in her sleep. Words not English, perhaps Latin. When roused, she denies knowledge. Temperature of her skin falls below normal. I recorded her voice, but on playback it distorts deeper, masculine. By 1939, Caldwell's work drew attention from the Federal Psychiatric Service, newly formed to standardize research. They supplied funding and equipment, including an early EEG machine. What she captured disturbed even her superiors: spikes of neural activity during hypnosis that mimicked electrical storms. Subject reports a smell of rain before fainting. Machine registers discharge, though power line remains stable. The recordings were submitted to Washington. Only summaries survive. The original data was lost in a laboratory fire the following winter. After that, Caldwell's writing changed. Her reports grew disjointed, less academic, more confessional. The children's pulses synchronize when they are near one another. It is not learned behavior. Their hearts remember something they have not lived. I have begun to dream of the hollow. The ground exhales. She hums beneath the soil, patient as sleep. On May 6, 1941, Caldwell was found unconscious in her office, surrounded by open files. Witnesses reported hearing what sounded like a woman sobbing through the building's ventilation system, though no one could locate the source. She resigned a month later, citing exhaustion and moral fatigue. Her unpublished manuscript, The Somatic Memory of Sin, was discovered among her papers decades later. The final page, written in fountain ink that had eaten through the paper, reads, "If the body carries conscience, the wrens are its reliquary. We are all soil. We are all capable of inheritance." After Caldwell's departure, the family W file was sealed. The descendants scattered, some to New Orleans, others to Texas, but official tracking ceased. Yet parish death registers show a pattern. Each generation lost one child between the ages of 7 and 9. Cause of death listed as fever of unknown origin. In 1952, a Catholic mission reopened near the old Wren property. The new priest wrote privately to the archdiocese, "The parish is quiet by day. At night, the ground sounds like it is thinking." His letter was never answered. That year's flood washed away the last visible remnants of the Wren foundation. Locals rejoiced, believing the curse finally buried beneath silt and water. But in photographs taken the next morning, a faint figure appears standing where the house once stood small, blurred and facing the camera. The negatives were stored in a parish drawer and forgotten until someone opened it again in 1978. In 1978, the Louisiana Historical Survey initiated a project to catalog forgotten settlements lost to erosion and flood. Among the listed sites was unnamed plantation ruins, St. Landry Parish, coordinates matching the Lonkin, Demmed Wren property. A team of 3 graduate researchers from Chilean arrived that autumn. Their names appear in field logs, Thomas Betchett, Ruth Delmer, and Alan Morris, but their report was never formally published. What survives are excerpts, scattered across institutional correspondence, and one microcassette transcript labeled Audio 4B, Night Survey. The tape begins with the sound of cicadas and rain, then Betchett's voice, calm, procedural, subsurface density consistent with collapsed foundation, possible limestone arch, depth reading 6 feet. After that, silence. Then a faint humming, female, distant, rhythmic. Morris whispers, "You hear that?" And the tape cuts off with a sharp click. The team's photographs, recovered from an evidence envelope years later, show indistinct shapes in the soil, depressions like prints, some human, some not. The negatives have since faded, leaving only pale outlines on the film. Within 2 weeks of that survey, Ruth Delmer was admitted to Ochsner Hospital with severe burns on her hands. She claimed they appeared overnight, like I touched a stove in my sleep. She told her roommate she could hear a woman's voice praying through the hospital radiator. She died of septicemia 3 days later. Her autopsy noted unexplained subdermal carbon deposits. The official cause was listed as infection due to contaminated wound. The surviving researchers left Louisiana, but in 1982, Morris mailed a sealed envelope to Chilean's anthropology department. Inside was a single Polaroid, black, warped, showing what appears to be a shallow pit filled with ash. On the back, he'd written, "The soil is breathing again." No one heard from him afterward. By 1985, rumors spread among local fishermen that ghost lights appeared over the bayou after heavy rain. Some described them as floating embers, others swore they were candles held by unseen hands. A local journalist, Graham Picou, visited the site for a column on Louisiana folklore. His notes, still preserved in microfilm at LSU, end with, "You can feel the air vibrating under your boots, like something is moving beneath the mud, patient and aware." He vanished a week later. His car was found miles away, engine running, headlights pointed toward the swamp. The driver's seat was empty, but his tape recorder remained. The tape itself contained only the sound of rainfall until, at the 43-second mark, a single voice murmured, "Inheritance is a door." After that, the state declared the area off-limits, citing unstable soil conditions. The site was quietly omitted from subsequent maps, but the locals never stopped speaking of it. They said the floods came heavier each year and the land refused to dry. That sometimes, in the heaviest storms, you could hear a woman's hymn carried under the thunder, the same melody their grandparents whispered about when they spoke of the hollow. In 1987, a letter surfaced in the New Orleans Historical Society, postmarked with no return address. It contained a fragment of paper, brittle with age, written in an 1008. Hundred's hand, she prays in the cracks. She waits for the name to be spoken again. The attached note, typed in modern ink, simply read, "You've already spoken it." The handwriting of that 19th century fragment was matched to the last surviving page of the Alaric Wren journals, a page believed destroyed in the 1893 courthouse fire. No explanation was ever found for how it resurfaced. The Wren archive, once thought entirely lost, resurfaced in 1993 when an estate liquidation in Baton Rouge yielded several sealed crates marked Medical Instruments New Orleans Seminary 1840s. Inside, beneath layers of dust and rusted scalpels, were 12 bound ledgers wrapped in oilcloth. Their title pages bore the initials A.W. and a sigil, an inverted cross encircled by 7 notches. The handwriting matched Dr. Alaric Wren, patriarch of the Plantation. The ledgers contained anatomical diagrams, written observations of subject #23-91, and prayers written between lines of medical notes. Each entry blurred the line between scripture and surgery. One passage, dated October 3rd, 1834, read, "The voice in her chest is not her own. It hums when the blood runs cold. I can make it speak if I listen between the ribs." Historians at LSU dismiss the journals as delusional ramblings of a decaying mind, but the final book, labeled Continuations, was different. It contained entries written decades after Alaric's recorded death in 1841. The ink changed, the hand wavered, but the style was identical. The last entry, dated May 12, 1878, was signed by a name no historian recognized, Elias D. Wren, yet the first line read, "My father's pulse still guides my hand." What followed was a detailed account of exhumations, transplants, and the experiment of breath, in which the descendants attempted to revive the lineage through remembrance of bone. The tone was methodical, proud, almost devotional. "Every generation forgets. I will not. I have taken the remnants of his work and bound them beneath the house. The soil drinks, the air answers. The dead are not gone. They are folded." Those who studied the journals later noticed that every mention of folding coincided with storms, floods, or reports of tremors in the surrounding land, phenomena historically recorded in parish newspapers. One archivist, Miriam Cole, became obsessed with decoding the sigil that adorned each page. She spent 2 years mapping its geometry, concluding that the symbol was not occult but anatomical, an illustration of a human diaphragm stylized into ritual form. In her final report, she wrote, "If the sigil represents breath, then perhaps the family sought to trap it, to preserve spirit through imitation of respiration." Weeks later, she vanished. Her office door was found locked from the inside, the walls covered in charcoal rubbings of lungs and ribcage. On her desk lay a cassette labeled Inheritance Heir. The recording, now sealed in university custody, contains 40 seconds of labored breathing followed by a whisper, barely audible. "He never stopped listening between the ribs." After that, silence. By 2001, when the archives were re-examined for digitization, 3 of the original crates were missing. No record of removal existed. Security logs showed no entries or exits that day, yet staff reported the scent of smoke and copper lingering in the vault for hours. Local rumor claims the crates were never stolen. They were reclaimed. That someone, perhaps a surviving Wren, had come to collect what was owed to the bloodline. What no one disputes is this: soon after, a series of sinkholes appeared along the Atchafalaya Basin, directly where the plantation once stood. From some, residents reported a strange exhalation, a rush of warm, fetid air, like breath rising from the deep. When state geologists investigated, they found nothing. No gas pockets, no fractures, no reason. Yet one field camera captured a flicker of light in the darkness below, steady and pulsing, as though something alive was beating far underground. It throbbed once, then twice, then stopped. The timestamp on the footage, May 12, 2001, exactly 123 years to the day of Elias Wren's final journal entry. The Wren plantation is gone now. No records mark its coordinates. No plaques acknowledge its existence. Yet every few years, someone finds something, small, misplaced, inexplicable, a coin stamped 1008. Buried in silt 10 miles from the nearest foundation, a fragment of scripture written backward on paper that refuses to burn. Or most often a humming, low pulsing, from the soil when the bayou swells with rain. In 2012, the parish approved a gas pipeline through what the engineers listed as uninhabited wetland. The drilling halted within 3 days. Machinery failed without cause, sensors overloaded, and operators reported vibrations beneath the bedrock. One technician, Daniel Lemaire, filed an incident statement before resigning. In it he wrote, "It's not the ground that's moving, it's the air under it, like something breathing through mud." The site was quietly abandoned, the equipment left to rust in the reeds. Local workers refused to return. They said the nights grew wrong there, no frogs, no wind, just silence until sunrise, and then the smell of smoke. Meanwhile, at Tulane University, the digitized Wren archive was sealed under a new classification, restricted spiritual pathology materials. The public index lists only a single line for reference, origin uncertain, provenance disputed. But among archivists, the rumor persists that one document remains accessible to certain scholars, a page labeled Continuation, 2021. Typed in modern font, no author listed, it reads, "The fold does not close, it only waits for recognition. The act of remembering is an invitation, and the invited always arrive." The timestamp on the digital file changes every year on May 12th, though no one has permission to edit it. The IT department calls it a glitch. The staff call it something else, the breath cycle. Those who have read it describe a heaviness in the room afterward, as if the air has thickened. One librarian reported hearing soft tapping beneath the floorboards of the archive. Another claimed she heard whispering from the vents, measured, even, like someone counting ribs. By 2023, the parish itself began reporting anomalies. Tree roots grew in spirals, the water table rose unnaturally fast, and migrating birds avoided the region altogether. Locals said the land had grown warm, that at night it steamed as if exhaling. A fisherman's wife, interviewed for a local paper, said she'd begun waking at 3:34 a.m. every night to the sound of distant chanting, always the same 2 words, "still waiting." Experts dismissed it as atmospheric distortion from the refinery miles away, but the refinery closed that same year. And now, when storms sweep through Louisiana, flashes of light are seen above the flooded cane fields, pale, rhythmic, and slow, as though the land itself remembers the pattern of a dying heart. A few still go looking for the ruins. They never find them. The water shifts, the path reorders. Yet those who return always describe the same thing: a narrow clearing where the air feels heavier, sweeter, and the sound of wind moves like breath between ribs. One man, a descendant of the enslaved families who once lived there, left a note at the St. Landry Church last year. It said only, "The soil is still whispering, it knows the names again." No one has seen him since. And still, late at night, when the wind slides off the gulf and drifts inland, you might hear it too, the quiet hum beneath the world, steady, patient, remembering, not the sound of ghosts nor wind, but the pulse of something ancient that refuses to rest. The inheritance was never gold or blood. It was memory itself, folded, breathing, waiting for you to listen. A whisper: if you remember their name, they will remember yours.